the southern border.
Last year alone, there were nearly 4,000 known or suspected terrorists that CBP picked up that came across our southern border.
But U.S. Customs and Border Protection says those figures are inaccurate. The actual number, as my colleague Julia Ainsley pointed out, is 6. That is a difference of 3,994. So we have seen President Trump's team try a different approach in recent days.
4,000 known or suspected terrorists come into our country illegally.
The State Department says there hasn't been any terrorists that they found coming across the southern border.
It's by air, it's by land, and it's by sea.
More than 4,000 known or suspected terrorists attempt to come into our country through various means.
And in his Oval Office address this week, there was no mention of terrorism. I'm going to turn to Nick Rasmussen now. He's written a great piece for Just Security on this, the specter of this terrorist threat. And I'm going to read one line from it here to kick us off. The picture being painted is one in which thousands of terrorists have been stopped crossing our southern border to infiltrate the homeland. If that were true, that would indeed be a crisis. In reality, no such crisis exists. I mentioned the reporting my colleague did about those 6 who were stopped. Spell it out for us straight here. How big a deal is this? How inflated has this been by this administration?
Sure. I mean, the argument I made in the piece was that we've always worried about terrorists trying to travel to the United States. If you're inside government, of course that should be on your list of concerns to have. And we've watched over the years as terrorist organizations have thought about it, talked about it, ruminated about potentially trying to insert individuals into the United States that way. But it's proven pretty difficult for them to do that. We are a hard target. We are a very difficult target for terrorist organizations.
And to interrupt you, I mean, something you point out is they get that.
And they get that.
And you talk about allocation of resources, and here we're talking about this $5.6 billion for this wall. In your piece, you point out places where that money might be better spent to combat homegrown terrorism.
Exactly, because I think the threat of terrorism that we are most worried about here inside the United States is actually attached to homegrown extremists, people who are attached to an ideology like that of Al-Qaeda or ISIS or some foreign terrorist organization, but in reality they were born here or spent most of their formative years here, or they certainly became radicalized while they were here. They did not come here as some terrorist operative. And if you're going to combat that problem, a wall isn't going to help you. Border security isn't going to help you. What is going to help you is investment in prevention programs. And it looks a lot like community policing does around the country. Dealing with gang problems is in some ways very similar to the challenge we face in dealing with these homegrown extremists. And modest sums of money can have real impact in this world as opposed to billions of dollars spent on a physical barrier.
Lisa, we talk about the politics, the myopic politics, but here it's spending as well.
Yeah, I just can't help listening to Nick's comments and reading his article, which is replete with common sense. If only the president had campaigned on multisyllabic words that express common sense policies instead of monosyllabic words like build that wall. But obviously the priority was to say simple things that clearly resonated with a section of the population. And there's just nothing as dramatic or exciting. Who do you go to visit for a photo op if you're investing money in needed reforms to make sure that people aren't, radicalized on the internet? That's not a photo op. And it's just dispiriting to think about when we spend all our time talking about a wall, which we rightly should focus on, because it's a preposterous idea. What are we not talking about? And worse yet, what's the government not investing in that would protect us more carefully?
Liz, when you watch that montage and you see that turn when Sarah Sanders' rhetoric changes and Mike Pence talks about by all means, is that an achievement in some sense that you've had such misinformation on other issues that this is an example? I guess I could be charitable and say where the administration is at least reversing course or changing what was driving rhetoric.
No.
Okay.
I feel like these are people who might want to have jobs later on in life, so they have to backtrack to get some semblance towards the facts. But for me, what I feel like, and to Nick's point so profoundly, is when we decide to solidify what a terrorist is and who we should be afraid of, how we we get away with saying it's the most vulnerable people? Syrian refugees, people who are traveling in a caravan, escaping governments that are killing their children. Like, the fact that we could so convince, and that Trump could so convince
committee would make it known that this was a bigger issue than it is.
I think that's right. And I mean, I took some comfort, maybe a tiny bit of comfort from the fact that the terrorism line of argument did not show up in the president's remarks the other day. I don't know if that was internal fact-checking, but they stayed away from making that argument, which I suspect reveals that they know there isn't an argument to be made, at least not on terrorism grounds.
All right, we're going to come back here in just a moment. Much more on that shocking report that the FBI was investigating President Trump for working on Russia's behalf. I'm going to be joined by Ben Wittes, who says as far as the FBI is concerned, there isn't much of a stretch between a criminal investigation and counterintelligence. He explains why. Next.
Food and get $120 in free food.
To most, he's Phil Mickelson, pro golfer. To me, he's, well, Dad. So when his joint pain from psoriatic arthritis got really bad, it scared me. And what could that pain mean?
Joint pain could mean joint damage. Enbrel helps relieve joint pain, helps stop irreversible joint damage, and helps skin get clearer. Enbrel may lower your ability to fight infections, serious, sometimes fatal events, including infections, tuberculosis, lymphoma, other cancers, nervous system and blood disorders, and allergic reactions have occurred. Tell your doctor if you've been someplace where fungal infections are common, or if you're prone to infections, have cuts or sores, have had hepatitis B, have been treated for heart failure, or if you have persistent fever, bruising, bleeding, or paleness. Don't start Enbrel if you have an infection like the flu.
Since Enbrel, Dad's back to being Dad.
Visit Enbrel.com and use the joint damage simulator to see how your joint damage could be progressing.
Ask about Enbrel. Enbrel. FDA approved for over 16 years.
Meet your genes.
Listen up. I'm a gene that impacts your muscle composition.
BTBD9 here. I could influence how much you move your arms and legs in your sleep. I'm a twitchy little gene.
We're two of the genes that may impact your risk for celiac disease.
We have a gluten situation. I'm linked to a Neanderthal trait.
Lactose intolerance.
Caffeine consumption.
This year.
Get started with your free online visit at GetRoman.com/TV.
1 hour pickup order?
Got it.
Brad of ink, and I have a big meeting today.
And 2 boxes of Twizzlers.
Yeah, for the team.
The team?
Go team.
Order online, pick up in an hour. And now buy 1 HPA, get 1 30% off at Office Depot Office Max.
American journalism, all of it, is the best anywhere in the world. This land contains an incredible quality and quantity of good common sense. And it's in no danger of being led down the primrose path by a journalist. At the risk of sounding presumptuous, I would say to all of you, be patient and have courage, for there will be better and happier news one day, if we work at it.
Welcome back to Up. I'm David Gura. We return to that article above the fold, A1 in the New York Times this morning, revealing that the FBI has looked into whether President Trump was secretly working on behalf of Russia. The investigation was reportedly opened after President Trump fired James Comey because the FBI was so concerned by the president's behavior. This was not just an inquiry into whether there was obstruction of justice. It was also a counterintelligence investigation to figure out whether President Trump's actions were a threat to national security. Well, in a new article for Lawfare, Ben Wittes writes it is time to revisit those links between the collusion and obstruction parts of the special counsel probe. All of this comes as the president ups his legal arsenal with 17 new lawyers ahead of Robert Mueller's final report and those investigations on Capitol Hill. And the president's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, gets ready to testify publicly before Congress about what he knows. My panel is back with me, and joining us now from Washington is Ben Wittes, who wrote that piece for Lawfare, senior fellow at Brookings, editor-in-chief of Lawfare, also an MSNBC legal analyst. Ben, let's start with those lines that you say we've talked about, we've come to accept. Let's start with one of them here, the line between obstruction and collusion. I'll read one line from your piece here. What if the obstruction was the collusion, or at least a part of it? You, in many thousands of words here, have spelled out the importance of this piece. Why is this particular part of it so important?
Well, so a lot of the discussion that we've had over the last couple years since the Comey firing has assumed that, you know, there's this underlying counterintelligence investigation that had been going on for a while, the so-called collusion investigation. And then the FBI, the president fires the FBI director, and a few weeks later we learn that Bob Mueller is investigating the firing and whether that obstructed justice. And people had assumed, a lot of the debate assumed, that those are kind of separate investigations, right? You've got your collusion, your counterintelligence investigation, and then you've got this criminal investigation on the obstruction side. And as the New York Times was reporting this story, I kind of started to revisit the question of, is that obstruction investigation really separate from the collusion, from the counterintelligence investigation that underlies it? And I've come to believe that they are much, much more closely integrated than people understand, including the fact that the obstruction itself, in the FBI's view, may well have been a form of collusion as they understood it.
Can't commend this piece enough by Ben. He sat down with Michael Schmidt as Michael Schmidt was reporting and working on this piece for the New York Times, and the piece on Lawfare is an expanded version of a memo that he wrote to Michael Schmidt upon seeing some testimony before the Congress of James Baker, his former colleague at Brookings, and of Lisa Page as well. Ben, I want to read one line here from Rudy Giuliani, the president's attorney, what he said to my colleague Kristen Welker last night. Quote, "If it was a counterintelligence investigation and it obtained any evidence, it would have to have resulted in some action being taken where they're imperiling our national security. This shows how out of control they are." Something you write about, something Michael Schmidt writes about, is this distinction between a criminal investigation and a counterintelligence investigation. Explain for us, as basically as possible here, what these counterintelligence investigations are like and how often they lead to arrests, how much more slow-moving they are, say, than a criminal investigation.
Right. Well, let's start off with what the difference is between a criminal investigation and a counterintelligence investigation, because those are words that people throw around, but they're actually really importantly different. So a criminal investigation is you have a crime that was committed or may have been committed, and the FBI gets information that, you know, there's a dead body, or someone suggested that David Gura is, you know, obstructing justice, right? So they investigate the possibility of that criminal act, or sometimes they know the criminal act took place, and the question is who did it. Sometimes they wonder if a criminal act took place, and they are trying to figure that out. Counterintelligence investigation is a different thing. They've discovered some evidence of a threat to national security. For example, Russian spies trying to collect intelligence in the United States. That may not be a crime, but there are these Russian spies doing things, right? And so you're trying to figure out how to stop them from doing it or how to feed them information. Now, a U.S. person who's working with them may be committing a crime, so you might use criminal authorities to deal with the counterintelligence problem that the investigation was set up to investigate. But the purpose of the investigation is not to prosecute a crime. The purpose of the investigation is to follow, track a national security threat in a fashion that allows you to redress the problems that threat creates.
Ben, Lisa Green with me here at the table is going to set down her donut. She's got a question for you here about your piece. Lisa.
Yeah, Ben, I'm curious about your take on Bill Barr, I think likely incoming Attorney General who's going to be before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And it seemed obvious that one of the lines of questions he would face is about his memo, unsolicited memo, which explained his concerns about an obstruction charge. How much of a game changer do you think this Times article and your own reporting is when it comes for the Senate Democrats, at least, to get ready to question him at the hearing?
So I'm so glad you asked that question, because Bill Barr's memo is a great example of the point I made earlier about people having this really firm sense that there was, that the obstruction investigation is a criminal matter, and then there's this other counterintelligence investigation. Bill Barr wrote a 20-page memo arguing that the president couldn't have committed a crime by firing Comey or by intervening in the Flynn investigation, and therefore the obstruction investigation shouldn't exist. The point, the importance of the New York Times story yesterday is that one of the importances is that it sort of answers the question of how that investigation exists, even if Barr is right about the obstruction matter, which is that they were investigating in part a crime, or a possible crime, but in part they were investigating whether the president's actions in seeking to shut down the investigation threatened national security. I think Barr will very likely get, first of all, a lot of questions on the merits of his legal argument about obstruction and Article 2 of the Constitution, but I also think he will now get probably, or should get, some questions. Isn't your memo a giant non sequitur in terms of what we have now learned?
Ben Wood, it's great to speak with you again. The piece for Lawfare, I have it here. Read it in compliment with the piece in the New York Times today. What if the obstruction was the collusion? On the New York Times' latest bombshell. I'll tweet a link out to that piece in just a moment. Up ahead, as one presidential contender throws her hat in the race, another would-be candidate drops out, showing that talking about running and actually running are two very different things. As yet another 2020 hopeful gets set to take the stage, you see it right there, to announce his own bid for the White House.
You might take something for your heart, your joints, or your digestion. So why wouldn't you take something for the most important part of you, your brain? With an ingredient originally discovered in jellyfish, Prevagen has been shown in clinical trials to improve short-term memory. Prevagen, healthier brain, better life.
Sometimes constipation happens. It happens to birds. It happens to dogs. And it happens to all of us. Luckily, there's Colace. It's the #1 doctor-recommended stool softener brand for occasional constipation.
Shopping for our home on Wayfair is so easy. They should make a jingle. Wayfair, you make home shopping easy.
Wait, that sounds familiar.
These new tools make my shopping a breeze. I can plan my room while I'm falling asleep.
The team?
Go team! Order online, pick up in an hour. And now buy one HP ink, get one 30% off at Office Depot Office Max.
For mornings that are straight up garbage, it's the little things that turn it all around. With undies that are 3 times softer than cotton, give yourself that first win of the day at MeUndies.com.
Got a million ways to get it.
Choose one. Choose one. Hey, bring it back. Bring it back. Now double your money and make it.
This ride has no resolution. There's no finish line. When cravings hit back. Choose Glucerna with slow-release carbs to help manage blood sugar and start making everyday progress.
David, I don't know what I'm going to do after November 6th. 2018. I'm thinking about it really hard, Elaine. You'll be the first person I let to know.
Well, let me stop you and say that I haven't decided to run for president.
I'm going to work full-time as hard as I can through the election date. We're going to do our work and make a decision when we know the facts. And let's see what happens.
I cannot count how many times Tom Steyer in that tartan tie dodged my question about whether he was running for president. I feel like I have to keep asking him that, even though he said he is not. After months of buildup, Democratic billionaire Tom Steyer making his big 2020 announcement this week that he is not running for president. There's that tartan tie. The decision comes as movement around the starting line is beginning to pick up. Here's Congressman Tulsi Gabbard going all in.
I have decided to run and will be making a formal announcement within the next week.
I guess that constitutes all in. Meanwhile, momentum is also building around Senator Kamala Harris amid reports she may announce she is running around Martin Luther King Jr. Day. She's making the rounds for a book tour, 2 books published in recent days. But other Democrats are making stops of their own. Congressman Beto O'Rourke reportedly kicking off a road trip in El Paso, Texas. In San Antonio, in a little more than an hour, former HUD Secretary Julian Castro will be announcing whether he is officially running for president. Senators Kirsten Gillibrand and Sherrod Brown are reportedly planning trips to Iowa, and Senator Elizabeth Warren is holding an event in New Hampshire just a little bit later today. Liz, I'm going to start with you. Let's start with the gentle lady from the 2nd District of Hawaii, Tulsi Gabbard. I said she went all in. She's announced that she's likely to make an official announcement in the coming days. This is de rigueur now of how these would-be candidates approach this. They're not going to say yes until I guess they say yes. Your reaction?
I mean, A, why, but B, she is somebody who has been really problematic. Democrats for having criticisms of the Knights of Columbus, and for me as a reproductive rights activist, the Knights of Columbus funds these fake clinics that lure vulnerable pregnant women into clinics to try to convince them to not have abortions. Their financial investment in social issues that Democrats have said are not part of our platform has been profound. And for her to criticize that, for me, I'm like, bye.
She says bye. Jamil, let me turn to you. Tulsi Gabbard in that interview with Van Jones saying there's one main issue that's central to the rest, and that is the issue of war and peace. The field beginning to fill up. Where does she fit in with the others that I mentioned and others who are still in the wings weighing whether or not to run?
Well, I don't see if war and peace is central to her platform. The fact that she went over to meet with Bashar al-Assad, I don't see how that's necessarily going to help her campaign.
She didn't say which side she was on.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I definitely think that her entrance into the race will be interesting, but I think it will not be consequential.
Lisa, what are you going to be listening for today? Julian Castro, another one of these would-be candidates who I think went on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and his twin brother was there. He's going to be there with him today in San Antonio, and all but said he was running today. We expect he's going to say that he is.
You know, clear platforms. I think one of the things that Elizabeth Warren did right when she announced her candidacy on social media was to say, I stand for, you know, the middle class, for the economy, and against a rigged system. And I'm really hoping that what we'll have is a balance toward clear policy declarations. P.S. No pressure, Democrats, but since a lot of current lawmakers are hoping that Donald Trump leaves office through the election, through the ballot box, rather than through an impeachment process that might not work, that's your job, ultimate candidate, is to take him on. And I think it's early to tell what sort of format, what sort of rhetoric will really work, given everything we've talked about this hour in that presidency.
I also think it's hard to differentiate yourself with your twin brother standing next to you. I'm not sure that's a super good strategy when you're announcing. Like, bring him later, but right now it's like, wait, which guy?
Please wait off in the wings. I can use you later to campaign where I'm not able to campaign.
Campaign surrogate, maybe.
Nick, you have been a career guy, so let me just pull back a little broadly. As you listen to all of this, what's a of paramount interest or important to you?
So, as you would expect, I would tend to focus on what these emerging candidates say about national security. Yeah. At the same time, I understand fully that that's not likely to be the set of issues on which our next president is most likely elected. But what I do look for with these candidates is seriousness. Have they invested the time and effort to get smart on these issues before putting themselves forward as potential presidential candidates? Have they done committee work in the Congress if they're senators or representatives? Do they have a voice on these national security issues? Have they actually demonstrated some bona fides on these issues? Tulsi Gabbard's an interesting case. She obviously deserves credit for having served her country in the military, deployed in war zones. There's no question about that. At the same time, she's taken some pretty interesting positions with respect to Syria and the Middle East that would raise questions, I think, among most national security professionals.
Jamil, last question to you on the issue of seriousness. You've got a gingivitis check on Beto O'Rourke, the congressman, as he does a live stream of his dental appointment earlier this week. Right. There is a movement in that direction to being very online, I think the phrase was that I read in the Times this week. Are you seeing that level of seriousness? Are you seeing a different approach to the presidency from a number of these candidates?
Now, while I understand that Congressman O'Rourke's dental exam wasn't exactly what we understood it to be.
There it is, yeah.
When we saw it posted on Twitter this week, I do think that there is a certain level of revelatory behavior that we don't necessarily need to see from our candidates. What we need to see are platforms. We need to see seriousness. We need to see in this age of Trump, these candidates telling us what they're for, and frankly, telling us we actually, this president's telling us who we need to be scared of, who we need to be frightened of. These people need to be telling us about the world that we actually are living in.
All right, we got about 20 seconds left. You brought Russian tea cakes last time. Lisa, you've brought
cashew sesame bars. And Liz,
I feel like it's a challenge. I feel like Lisa brought the gauntlet down. I wasn't told she was bringing pastries. I would have jumped in. So I want Lisa and I to be booked back on the show together, and I want a pastry off.
Pastry off.
I'm going to primary you for a pastry plate.
Okay.
There we go.
All right, good. I want a trophy. I want a trophy.
There you go. Stay tuned for that. Thank you to my panel, Liz Winstead, Jamil Smith, Lisa Green, Nicholas Rasmussen joining me here in New York. Up ahead, Joy Reid diving deep into that bombshell report from the New York Times on the FBI probing whether Donald Trump was secretly working on behalf of Russia as the government shutdown makes history for all the wrong reasons.
Ways